What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Freedom to Flourish podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Tim Augustiniak, here with a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Joel Miller. Today, we have an awesome episode for you. We're going to be doing something, or at least talking about something today that a lot of people ask about in the office very, very frequently, and it's what is the big difference between the food here and the food in Europe? I can't tell you how many times I've had patients that come into the office and they say, I went to vacation in Italy and I ate all the pasta, as much pizza
Yep.
as I wanted, all these things, and
Yep.
my stomach was fine. But it's like,
Yep.
maybe it's the jet lag, or maybe it's something with the air in the plane, or whatever it is. But as soon as you get on that plane to come home, all of the food starts reacting with your gut negatively again, and things just are not as good on your body. And
Yeah.
there are legitimate reasons for why that may be, and we're going to get into those today. Have you heard
Yep.
similar things quite a bit, Dr. Joel?
Yeah, that's exactly what I've heard from a lot of patients. Part of that's kind of what sparked the desire to like jump into some of this and research this and be like, hey, let's get a good episode with this topic. And we're talking about like we mentioned Europe, and that's where a lot of our research was done, but also understand that I had a patient that just got back from Australia and New Zealand, for example. Even though they're not necessarily considered Europe, like a lot of the same kind of principles apply. Of course, every other kind of country is going to be like a little bit different. But one of the common things that we've seen nonetheless is U.S. food is not as healthy, it seems, compared to all these other countries. So we're going to jump into all that today.
Yeah, well, that's quite the trade-off. We get guns, but crappy food. They don't get guns, but their food's good. So I guess what's important?
What's important? No more word. So let's
I
go through
do.
this list, Dr. Tim. Let's kind of hit the highlights here, and so our listeners kind of know like, hey, what we're getting into, and then we'll kind of go piece by piece. And for our listener, we'll probably end up having a part two, just because we just got a lot of stuff to walk through here. So, Dr. Tim, number one here on our list. I'll kind of walk through these, and then I'll let you hit our next point here. So in general, here's the list. With European food, there's generally fewer artificial additives and dyes than in U.S. food. There's stricter pesticide regulations with European food, whereas it's obviously a lot less strict in U.S. There's a lot less ultra-processed food in Europe. The wheat varieties are going to differ to where there's actually like a lower kind of gluten level with a lot of those specific wheats that they're using. Part of that has to do with they do a lot of sourdough, which naturally with the fermentation process is lower gluten. There's just shorter ingredient lists. Most people have seen that. We'll talk about that and why that is. There's higher animal welfare standards. What does that mean? It means basically they're banning different things that otherwise in the U.S. we give to our livestock, like growth hormones, stuff like that. So we'll talk about that. There's less added sugar with European food. There's no high fructose corn syrup. They prepare the food kind of in a much more traditional manner. And then lastly, which is kind of interesting, is the portion sizes are a little bit smaller. When we were doing research initially, there was a little bit I was seeing of like, okay, some of the stuff, the regulations and things are different around food there. But then I was seeing some stuff like, yeah, but their lifestyle is different too, which I do think that plays a part, but we'll get into that. So, but Dr. Tim, like before we get in these specifics and go piece by piece, what's the overwhelming kind of perspective and difference we're seeing? I mentioned this in one of the last episodes talking about the cultural difference. I'll touch on that. But how about when it comes to overall just the regulations and the mindset when it comes to deciding like, hey, should we have this in food or should we not? And should we be more strict or less strict? Like, walk us through some of that.
From I guess the legislative side of it, that's really
Yeah.
the biggest thing because,
Yeah.
whatever the government allows, that's what companies are going to do. They're going to make
Yep.
their products look more enticing. They're going to last longer. That way they sell more and there's less waste and they can make more money. And so it has to come from some sort of legislative standpoint. And so from the research that we did, the general idea that I got from how the United States goes through processing and prosecuting and banning ingredients versus the process that Europe goes through, it kind of reflects the legal system that we have, where it's almost like innocent until proven guilty aspect in the United
Yep.
States, where we have to go through all these measures and class action lawsuits and have all kinds of people with cancers and all sorts of health issues before things get banned. Whereas in Europe, if there is any sort of controversy about whether or not something is harmful and can cause problems, whether it's developmental delays, whether it's autism, whether it's hyperactivity in kids, whether it's cancers, you name it, they just ban stuff. And then from there, if it is proven to be safe, they will reduce those restrictions on it. And so I know, for example, in France, if I'm not wrong. If you guys are from France and I say this wrong, I apologize. Please correct me. But there is you are guilty until proven innocent, I guess, process with the way that they prosecute people. And so, just side note about how it almost seems like it's reflecting the way that they prosecute people. It's almost like they prosecute these ingredients the same way. So anyway, I think it's very from what I was reading, supposedly the United States tries to be they try to be very capitalistic in how they do things, where a free market breeds innovation, and that's what helps, bring costs down, all these things. But at the same time, things obviously get out of hand sometimes with these food additives that really aren't food. They're just chemicals that are petroleum based, or they are chemicals that kill off bugs and pesticides and all the stuff. So I think we could take some notes. I'm all about freedom, but at the same time, at what expense are some of our freedoms? So I think
Yeah,
Europe's
absolutely.
got some stuff going on here that's good.
Yep. And we're going to see a cultural difference too. I'll touch on this and then we'll jump into these details. And the cultural difference that we'll see is in America, we kind of prioritize like longevity of food. So preservation of food, like how long can it last on the shelf? We've kind of prioritized kind of from a marketing standpoint, like excitement and flavor and things like that. And it's a lot more of a business in that way. But also in America, like remember the American dream. America is, has kind of been in some ways, it's had a lot of that kind of American dream ideology in its roots, and so a lot of it is just like being successful in business and all these different things. And the difference there is in the U.S. I mean, people are working long hours, they're not resting much, and they're just going. In Europe, a lot of the lifestyle is very different, where they're actually like going a lot slower with things. They might sleep. I haven't been to Spain yet, but had a friend that had just visited Spain last summer and was just like, yeah, their lifestyle is totally different. They are like kind of waking up around like 8 or 9 in the morning. They kind of work for a bit, and then once they get to about 5 or 6, they get off work, and then they just kind of hang out and like party, and they'll stay up late till 12, hanging out with friends and doing all the things. And it's just a very slow lifestyle. And so when we talk about, like in a couple episodes ago, when we touched on the obesity rates are a lot higher in the U.S. versus Europe, I think some of these different cultural differences definitely play an impact with things. And I think you'll see some of that in some of the regulation and things like that, where here we are, like you said, kind of more free market, like, hey, innovation, let's create stuff, and there's different ingredients and things like that are being added in that's supposed to make either food last longer here in the U.S. or taste better or whatever the benefit is. But in Europe, they're just a lot more simple. There's a lot more hesitation with adding in some of these things that are not necessarily natural. So let's kind of jump in. Number one, additives and dyes. We're gonna try to get through as much of this as we can. So we're gonna fly through some of this. Additives and dyes. So there are certain things in Europe that are banned that are not banned here in the U.S. So in the U.S., these things are added to food. So we'll go through a few of these here. So potassium bromate, this is a big one, is ADA. A lot of people refer to it as ADA, azodicarbonamide, titanium dioxide, BHA and BHT, brominated vegetable oil, and then, of course, the synthetic dyes, which we've seen some reduction in that in the U.S., praise the Lord, but there's still some things there. So these are just some examples of different chemicals. I'll just walk through a few of these, Dr. Tim, and then we'll jump into our next piece here, which is the kind of the pesticide regulation. So potassium bromate, this is something that's used in a lot of breads, rolls, pizza dough, stuff like that. And basically what it does is it helps us strengthen and raise the dough. So in general, sounds good, except for in Europe, they banned it because it could be possibly a human carcinogen. And they found that it was basically linked to tumors in animals. So tumors in animals, DNA damage, stuff like that. And so, again, similarly, like in Europe, they're going to be more, hesitant with adding in things like that. They're going to do the studies first. In the U.S., it's more like, well, let's add it in and kind of, if it ends up causing issues and we kind of confirm that, then take it out, that kind of thing. Azodicarbonamide used also in flour and dough. Guys, you've seen two things here with bread now. That again kind of just helps with conditioning the bread and the buns. So again, in Europe, banned. They found that it was linked to respiratory irritation, and then again, potential carcinogens when heated up, which means like, hey, this thing could cause more damage to the body and be linked to cancer. Titanium dioxide is something that you've maybe seen on certain labels here in the U.S. So it's used in like a lot of white coatings, basically, kind of give it some of that color. So they put it in things like candies, icings, dairy, pastry, stuff like that. Similarly, in Europe, it was found to be just having a high genotoxicity risk, which basically means, hey, this thing might be linked to DNA damage, similarly. And so, again, not something that we want in our food. BHA and BHT, again, these are preservatives. They're thrown in our cereals, chips, snacks. And again, it just helps with preserving things. You may have seen these. If you're a label reader, you may have seen these on some of your food products that has kind of been there all this time. Similarly, in Europe, animal studies showed that, hey, there may be increasing tumors. And so they've banned it. Brominated vegetable oil. We talked about seed oils. Seed oils are the worst, as I say sometimes. But the brominated vegetable oil, BVO, it's referred to, is a lot of times added to different soft drinks, like citrus flavored soft drinks, so with flavor. And essentially banned in Europe. Basically, they found that there was some different neurological and developmental issues in animals. So they banned it. And then, of course, the food dyes, right? So they throw food dyes here in the U.S. in candies and cereals and different drinks, Mountain Dew, all the different things. And, of course, there's a lot of links with that and, ADD and ADHD in children and developmental issues and allergy issues and things like that. So they have banned it, and thankfully the U.S. is getting more towards that. If you're familiar with that from the last couple of years. But unfortunately, those impacts don't necessarily take effect, I think it's 2027 or maybe 2028. But nonetheless, some of those things are going to be improving, thankfully. So that's some of the additives. That's just a few examples there of the different ingredients that are banned in Europe because they had studied it and they said, hey, there's different links between this and tumors and DNA damage, whereas these things are still allowed in the U.S. food. So in general, the main takeaway here is read the labels. If you can't pronounce the ingredients in the foods, okay, number one, it's probably not good for you. It's probably synthetic. It's probably going to cause some kind of stress to your body. But number two, also don't be afraid to read a label. See, you're like, I don't know what titanium dioxide is. And look it up online and just look up titanium dioxide and, what is it? Where does it come from? If it is synthetic, it shouldn't be in our food. If it's natural, then look at where's it from and why do they add it and things like that. And usually you'll be able to figure out hey, should I be putting this in my body or is this probably not a good idea? So, Dr. Tim, anything to add to that before we jump into some of the pesticide regulations?
I think the general idea with at least this first section is, yes, if you can't pronounce it, obviously don't eat it. But what do we always say about how to eat properly? Whole Foods, walk around the perimeter of the grocery store. If
Yep.
you are going down all of the aisles where things need to be preserved because they're on a shelf, that's where you're going to run into a lot of this stuff. Now,
Yep.
there are other things that we're going to run into, like with pesticides and growth hormone and chemicals that they'll give animals to, increase muscle mass and all those things that, yes, you cannot avoid if you are walking the perimeter of the grocery store. But at least for this first section, you're not going to find a steak with food dyes in it. You're not going to find a banana with food dyes in it. You're not going to find titanium dioxide in an apple. So if you're going around the perimeter of the grocery store, you're automatically negating this first section. So of all the things to avoid, it's just as simple as just eat real food. you know there's just no point in even messing with it. um, but just to provide a awesome little example that people can look at super easily on their phones wherever they're at, just Google real quick Fruit Loops in the UK versus Fruit Loops in the United States, and the color difference is just insane. I wish we had a big projector like on Joe Rogan, like, hey, Jamie, pull that up. Um,
Yeah.
and we're not there yet, maybe one day. But it's insane. Like, I mean, the ones that are from the UK, they're like kind of yellow, kind of dark purple, kind of red, but they get their
Yeah,
color
but
from
it's kind of,
beets and things like
yeah,
that. Versus
yeah,
you look at the US Fruit Loops and they're bright green and bright red and just all these colors that it just does not look natural. If it was a deep green, if they used like spinach or something to color it, that'd be one thing. But I mean, it's like neon. It's like the color of the battery icon when you charge your phone. Like it's that green. Like
yeah, it's
what in
pretty
nature
wild.
is that green?
Yeah, I just pulled it up. Yeah, they're using in the UK, they're using things to color it like spinach, obviously for like the green, carrots, black currant, paprika. And in the US, they're using like red 40, blue 2, blue 1, BHT. We just talked about yellow 6. It's wild, wild stuff. But yeah, I definitely look it up, guys. It's very interesting, the difference in color.
Yeah. So if you're looking at a catch-all on all the food dyes all at once, eat Fruit Loops.
Yeah,
It's a great idea.
yeah, seriously.
But anyway, like I said, just avoid the processed stuff, and you'll avoid these quite a bit.
Yep.
Um, but the next thing that we got on the list here is pesticides. So, um, as a whole, just like I said previously, the philosophy in Europe ends up being, let's take precautions first. If there's any controversy as to whether or not this could cause problems, let's just avoid them in the first place. Versus um, just like with glyphosate, with how Monsanto went through and genetically modified all of our crops to be resistant to glyphosate. So then we just spray it on everything now. Yes, it's allowed for significantly greater crop yield and everything. Um, but I mean, I've been reading a lot about there's a class action lawsuit that they're trying to push to the Supreme Court right now over those or the Roundup slash glyphosate that's being sprayed on our crops and linking it to cancers and everything. So I'll be interested to see how that comes out and what the result of that is. But unless there's a lot, I mean, we know there's a lot of money involved, but unless there is any sort of, I guess, coercion, I'd be willing to bet that things are going to go the way that we want it to, and that foods hopefully will start to be, less full of that stuff. But I'm not hopeful because there is a lot of money involved. So we'll just see. But regardless, Europe tends to be more cautious. We just kind of let things happen, which really isn't great. And so on our example list here of some of these pesticides, of course, glyphosate is very, very high on that list. It's known to, or at least suspected, maybe it's a conspiracy theory. And what do we know about those? To be tied to various cancers, developmental delays, all of those things, where it's considered one of those forever chemicals, where once they're in your body, they can be very, very, very difficult to get rid of. And so, obviously, not great. Um, there are other chemicals called neonicotinoids. Say that 10 times fast.
Bro.
But they are restricted slash banned in the European Union due to concerns with ecosystems for natural native bug species. So
Yeah.
um, Whether or not that has an effect on us, I mean, if it's killing them, it's probably not having great health effects on us. Um, Long-term exposure to this stuff, of course, it's going to disrupt, our immune system, lead to various cancers, things like that. But there's also suspicion of long-term neurological effects. And so, at least within the functional medicine realm, long-term pesticide exposure oftentimes will end up being linked to things like demyelination disorders and chronic long-term neurological issues. So people with things like MS or like Guillain-Barré syndrome, stuff like that, a lot of times they'll be pretty dang toxic with this stuff. Um, yeah, all in all, just really, really not great stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, Dr. Joel, anything else to add to that? I mean, all
No.
things
Yeah.
considered, chemicals
Yeah.
that kill stuff, probably not good for us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so the one of the biggest things again people talk about is like the difference in bread, and that right there is one good informational piece. Is like, hey, they're spraying a bunch of other stuff on our crops here in the U.S. They're not doing that in Europe. There's tighter regulations, and that definitely will impact the food and how you feel afterwards. And we'll get into next here. We'll talk about some of the other different ingredients they're adding to our foods here in the U.S. But one of the things we'll touch on is like the different wheat strains, so the different types of wheat used. But for number 3 here, ultra processed ingredients. So there's some other ingredients that are added in that are noted as like chemical emulsifiers and stabilizers. So carrageenan is a big one. You may have seen this. I see this all the time when I'm looking at ingredient labels. And whenever I see this, I'm like, I'm not going to have that food. I'm going to avoid that. But basically, they put in all kinds of stuff. They put in the infant formulas. It was banned in Europe in infant formulas because they were finding that it was causing a lot of gut inflammation, maybe linked to insulin resistance. That just, it blows my mind that it's in our food here for our babies. But there's a lot of other links with carrageenan to just overall just nervous system dysregulation and stuff like that. Tripotassium phosphate, another emulsifier they throw in things here in the U.S. Again, banned in Europe. And essentially, you'll see a lot of things like mono and diglycerides and things like that used in U.S. food that kind of helps improve texture and shelf life and all this stuff. Again, things that are banned in Europe. We talk about aspartame, sucralose, saccharin. These are artificial sweeteners, flavor enhancers. They're used in U.S. foods. Anything that's non-sugar or low sugar in the U.S. usually has one of these. And again, these things have been kind of banned or at least limited in Europe. MSG is another big one that again has kind of been had a lot tighter regulations in Europe. And again, with each of these things, they've kind of seen a number of different trends, but they've seen gut microbiome disruption. So it's throwing off people's gut health. How many people are experiencing that in America? Almost everybody that I see and everybody that I talk to has some kind of gut issue. And it's like, well, there's a bunch of stuff, a bunch of little poisons sprinkled throughout our food, essentially. And so the emulsifiers can affect the intestinal lining and overall gut microbiome balance with the good bacteria and bad bacteria and so forth. It'll drive inflammation. That's been shown a lot in some of the animal studies. And then overall behavioral and neurological concerns, especially the artificial sweeteners. So if we're talking about our health as adults and overall our behavior and our mind and having balanced emotions and good gut health, we need to be looking at our ingredients here and avoiding these things, and especially for our kids. If we're feeding our kids different things like artificial sweeteners, if we're a little bit looser on things like carrageenan and MSG and tripotassium phosphate and all these different things, then and we see that our kids are having more issues with focus and attention and energy, and maybe they might have too much energy, and they clearly have nervous system dysregulation, then it might be coming from some of these different things. Dr. Tim, anything to add to that topic there?
Not a ton. I mean, all in all, I really hope that the general idea that people are getting from this episode is avoiding processed stuff. If you just avoid the processed stuff, a lot of these things are not going to be in there, you know? I mean, this is, I mean, of course, like I said, pesticides, yes, you can kind of do your best to avoid those. because a lot of them are going to be on things like wheat and breads. And if you were to get some, organic, maybe even imported grain from Europe and mill your own flour and, do the whole thing, making your own sourdough for bread, you're going to avoid that completely. So these first 3 points that we've gotten through,
Yeah.
food additives, and then you got your pesticides, and then this third one, the ingredients, um, just don't eat processed stuff and you'll avoid it. So all
Yeah.
in all, just everybody who's listening, just keep that in mind. It might sound really scary, but if you're eating how you're supposed to be eating, this really shouldn't be as much of a concern.
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's get into the next one, which honestly is one of the most profound ones, I think, because bread used to be, I mean, even in a biblical sense, used to be referred to as like the bread of life, because bread used to contain, I think I read one time like 20, like however many essential nutrients there are that we need to get through our food beyond our macronutrients for energy. Um, there's like 20, like almost 30, like 27, something like that. And ancient grains used to contain, or I'm not sure if they still contain, but the grains that we used to eat as commonplace, just the normal, used to contain like 22 out of 27 or 23 out of 27 essential nutrients. Don't quote me on the exact number, but very few nutrients were not found in those. Iodine was one of them, and a couple other things. I believe vitamin A is on that list too. But with that being the case, these ancient grains used to be something that were an absolute staple, that the overwhelming majority of somebody's daily diet was made up of these. Whereas now, it's like we can't even eat bread without having problems. And so, where's the problem with that? And we kind of briefly touched on this in some previous episodes, but the whole idea with wheat and gluten and just all that stuff is there's different ratios of the proteins that are under the umbrella term of glutens. So we have, they are called, let's see, let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. We have gliadin and glutenin. And so more modern uh, grain or wheat strains have way more glutenin, which allows them to basically have way more aggressive gluten structures. And glutenins are the ones where our bodies will usually have I guess the immune system mediated sensitivity stuff. So in other words, that's fancy talk for, allergies. Those are the things that really kick off the allergies. And so back in the day, with mainly eating things like einkorn and various wheat strains like that, spelt, all of those things, rye, um, not only did it have a higher gliadin to glutenin ratio, or I'm sorry, lower ratio, um, therefore weakening the gluten strength. They also are made up of far fewer chromosomes, and therefore their structure, their DNA structure was way smaller, and therefore way more easily digested, which didn't interact with our immune systems basically at all. Um, in addition to that, back to the pesticides. Nowadays, the wheat varieties, they are just sprayed with all sorts of pesticides, and so not only are you getting the excessive gluten and the strains of gluten in higher amounts that interact with our immune system, but there's also more, more chromosomes. It's a larger molecule that we
Yeah.
interact with more, and
Yeah.
then on top of that, you get all of the glyphosate and all of those things that cause problems. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of problems that go with that. Also, in addition to that, modern milling of flour, it ends up a lot of times using heat, which will basically reduce the effectiveness, um, or I guess reduce the bioavailability of the nutrients that are found in things like the bran, the germ, all of those things, where basically they'll go rancid very quickly. But then also a lot of the milling process, they'll actually strip that away, so they'll just have the I guess the white flour component of it. They'll just have the starch, and that's what all of your Wonder Bread and things like that are made out of because it tastes better. However, all of the nutrients and essential fatty acids that are found in the germ is just totally stripped away. And by the time that we usually get it, if we were to get, whole wheat varieties and things like that, a lot of times it's rancid at that point due to the heating process that they use along with the milling. And so the best way, say you're making your bread at home, obviously don't apply any heat to it before you're baking, but just mill it yourself. Get some ancient grain varieties like einkorn, um, allow it to ferment, start a sourdough starter, allow it to ferment to break down some of that gluten even further, and then bake it yourself. I mean, the best possible thing that you can do is completely, I guess, shun the modern gluten, the modern wheat, because it is not at all what it used to be. I mean, if you were to take somebody from, 1,000 years ago and give them today's bread, they probably think it tastes pretty good, but it's to their knowledge of what bread is, it's not bread. It is completely, completely different. Completely different grain at this point, completely different ingredients, completely different process to make it. It's really, really just not what it used to be. So all in all, gluten, some people, especially like in a clinical sense in our office, people will come in and they'll have significant reactions to gluten. And ironically enough, if even with modern gluten, as long as it's not, the GMO kind that's bred with all this, resistance to pesticides and stuff, they'll get, the Italian imported pasta from Aldi and they won't react to it. It's completely, full of gluten. It's made out of wheat, but they don't react to it. People will get imported flour from Italy or imported flour from some European country. They won't react to it. But as soon as they use flour from the United States, they react to it. And so, at the very least, there's something different about it to where our immune systems react differently here versus in Europe. There's whether it's the GMO aspect of it, or lack of pesticides, you name it. But all I know is I've had countless not only patients, but also, I mean, back in undergrad, when my sister was, still in college, she studied abroad in Belgium for a semester, and she could eat bread over there like it was no problem. And she comes back here, gluten causes her all kinds of problems. And I've heard that from countless patients as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I personally have not been to Europe. I'll be curious to see how I do when the day comes where I go over there and, eat all kinds of food on a great vacation. But at the very least, everybody that I've talked to says that they digest over there like way easier. The food just doesn't irritate the gut like it does over here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Tim, there's so much, there's a lot with the whole milling conversation, right? So obviously you talked about the different types of wheat and berries and so forth. We talked the different grains. We've talked about the different things like the differences in regulation of what can be sprayed on these crops and so forth. The milling is really important as well, obviously, and even the sourdough is important. But one thing I recommend for people, if you want to learn more about that, there's a really good episode on Alex Clark's podcast with Sue Becker. I think the title is something like "Why Gluten Isn't the Enemy" or something like that. It's a really good episode. I don't agree with everything that Sue Becker says, but a lot of the things that she says and kind of how she explains things is really good. And here's kind of the general piece of it. When milling bread or milling grains into flour, you got industrialized and essentially like mass produced at some point, where people used to do it at home. I don't know if I think maybe was it the 60s or 70s or 80s. I don't have my information in front of me there, but essentially what they started doing when they started industrializing it is they would strip away parts of the wheat berry. So there's the middle part called the endosperm, and the inner part called the germ, the outer part called the bran. Basically, they'd strip away the bran, the outer layer, the germ, the inner layer, and they would leave the endosperm. And the reason why they started doing that was because the endosperm had a much whiter appearance, but also when you remove the outer layer, it would make the flour finer and lighter. When you remove the inner component, the germ, it would create a much longer shelf life. So it would keep it from going rancid sooner. And so the problem with this is like all the nutrients are in those two parts. So then they started having to enrich the bread. And when they enrich the bread, they add in synthetic vitamins and minerals. And to me, that just sounds like a terrible exchange. We're going to take away all the nutrients, make the product last longer, but because people start developing all these deficiencies, we add in the synthetic vitamins and minerals. It's a terrible exchange, absolutely terrible. So anyways, if you'd like more information on that, you can definitely check out that episode. All right, Dr. Tim, there's a couple other things here that I think let's go ahead. We can walk through this and then we can wrap up here, Dr. Tim. So we talked about the ingredient lists and the overall like length of them. Obviously, in the U.S., they're a lot longer. That's because they're adding in a lot more preservatives to kind of stabilize it long term. They add in emulsifiers, flavor enhancers, all these different things to try to make it cheaper, make it look better, and make it last longer. But again, it's at the sacrifice of our health. And the last kind of two big points here is the regulations on how they take care of the animals is different in Europe versus the U.S. So in Europe, they have banned the use of growth hormone in dairy. Whereas here in the U.S., they're still able to give growth hormone, the synthetic hormone, to these cows to basically increase their milk production. So, they're literally on like anabolic steroids, essentially. And again, Europe banned it. There's been some links to cancer risk and things like that. There's another nutrient called ractopamine, which is, I didn't hear about it before my research here, but basically this helps produce like more lean muscle in pork and beef and turkey. So it's used in the U.S. It's banned in Europe because they were finding that there was some different issues with like the animals' cardiovascular systems and things like that. So definitely things that we do not want in our food. The last little piece is antibiotics. You know this. A lot of the reason why antibiotics are given in the U.S. is because these animals get infected. The reason why they get infections is because they're jacked up on grains, a ton of corn and non-GMO corn or GMO corn and soy and all that stuff that fattens them up and increases omega-6s. When you increase the omega-6s a ton, it creates a ton of inflammation. They get infected. They need antibiotics. It's a nasty cycle of sorts. And then the last point is high fructose corn syrup and sugar, which we could probably do an episode just on those things. But essentially, they're with high fructose corn syrup, it's used significantly less in Europe, and they're using more of just straight like cane sugar usually, which in general is, obviously there's such thing as getting too much sugar, but compared to high fructose corn syrup, health-wise, it's going to have a lot less nasty effects with things. So those are kind of the big things. That's kind of our big list. And I kind of wanted to work through this last couple quickly because I know we need to wrap up, Dr. Tim. Dr. Tim, any last thoughts here to kind of take home? I've enjoyed going through this with our listeners and just kind of investigating this a little bit more thoroughly.
Main thing. So all in all, hopefully this episode has, I guess, opened your eyes to some of the differences that maybe you've heard about people going over to Europe and they, feel fine eating all the pasta and all the things. And we're kind of wondering why. Well, a lot of this is why. It's the lack of genetic modification. It's the lack of pesticides, lack of food additives that are, thrown in there. But then, practical steps forward. Do not eat processed stuff. At the end of the day, like I said already, probably 2 times already on this episode, go around the perimeter of the grocery store. But then from there, looking into, it's called the Dirty Dozen. Is that what it is? The Dirty Dozen for organic foods?
Clean 15, Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, Clean 15, Dirty Dozen. So Google those, take a look into it. They're basically lists of foods where, for the sake of bridging that gap between organic and cost effectiveness, there are certain foods that you just don't need to worry about organic versus inorganic because it really doesn't make any difference but as to what, is in them. But then also, so that doesn't really cover the whole meat side of it. So just honestly, find a local farmer. Organic, grass-fed, you name it. Those a lot of times can be buzzwords that if you look into really what I guess the legal requirement is to be able to put those on food labels, it's not what you'd think. I mean, if you're looking at free-range chickens, I forget what the exact requirement is, but they are able to be considered that. I think if they have access to go outside for 10 minutes a day, something like that.
That's crazy.
So it's crazy how bare bones the requirements are for stuff like that. So there's no way to know unless you know the farmer and know really what's going on. And of course, that's costs a bit more money. But at the same time, investing in your health is one of the best things that you can do. I mean, if it means that you get how much more time on the end of your life, I don't know how much people would pay, but I mean, obviously, don't go bankrupt in your 20s over wanting to be healthy later on. But knowing a farmer, somebody who's honest with their animals and honest with what they're giving their animals and feeding them and raising them and processing them and all that stuff, that is the absolute best way that you can know what's going into your food. If you do that for your meats and your eggs and all that stuff, and then go to your farmer's market and find good sources of organic, not pesticide ridden fruits, vegetables, all those things, you're going to be doing great. That, and then milling your own flour with ancient grain and making your own sourdough, all that stuff. Do those things, and honestly, the overwhelming majority of this list does not even have to be a concern for you. That doesn't mean that you can just go eat whatever. It just means that if you're eating within those boundaries and doing all the things that you should be doing and that we all should be doing in the first place, it doesn't really matter, at least to you on the individual level. From a public health standpoint, yeah, it still matters. And I think we need to do something about it. However, there's nothing that I'm going to do to affect that. There's nothing that, Dr. Joel's going to do to affect that. It's just, try to be as healthy as you can be, and the healthiest that you can be and the healthiest that your family can be. And try to, at the very least, for people that you care about, educate them. Let them know this is what's in our foods and this is why. And hopefully this podcast has been a good resource for that.
Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up. We have a day to get going to here. So my name's Dr. Joel Miller. The practice here is Freedom Health and Wellness in Flower Mound, Texas. If you guys have any questions, you can find me online at drjoelmiller.com. You can find me on Instagram at drjoelmiller. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you guys have any questions, definitely reach out, let us know. If you guys have any topics you want us to cover, we welcome suggestions and would be happy to consider those. Again, hope you guys have enjoyed this episode.
I'm Dr. Tim Augustiniak here in Bentonville, Arkansas at Flourish Functional Wellness Center. If you want to find me online, my website is draugustiniak.com. That's draugustiniak, or flourishfwc.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out, let us know. And yeah, as always, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.